Well, we're going to return now to the main story this evening. The Prime Minister's speech earlier today setting out his new strategy, a 5-year strategy on tackling homegrown Islamist extremism, which he described as the struggle of our generation. It was billed by his advisers as one of the Prime Minister's most important speeches to date, and it included a direct appeal to young British Muslims.
And I want to say this directly to all young people growing up in our country. I understand that it can be hard being young, and it can be even harder being young and Muslim, or young and Sikh, or young and black in our country. I know that at times you're grappling with huge issues over your identity, neither feeling a part of the British mainstream, nor a part of the culture from your parents' background. And I know that for as long as injustice remains, be it with racism, discrimination, or sickening Islamophobia, you may feel there's no place for you in Britain. But I want you to know there is a place for you, and I will do everything I can to support you.
Prime Minister speaking earlier today with me, Dr. Erin Saltman, an expert in radicalisation from the Institute for Strategic Dialogue, and Baroness Nicholson, who chairs the Sexual Violence and Conflict Committee of the House of Lords and is the Prime Minister's trade envoy to Iraq. We'll be talking to both of you in a moment. It's nice to see you both. Thanks very much. But I should say as well that Baroness Nicholson is also chair of the charity AMAR International Foundation, which helps those caught up in conflicts. The charity recently flew 3 Yazidi women to London who'd been held by so-called Islamic State as sex slaves. They came to the UK to tell their stories to British school children, including students from the Bristol City Academy, where a 15-year-old left to join IS last year. And this was the message they had.
They were promised a nice house, nice family, money, you know, things little girls such as 15, 14 years old would want.
لا ماكو كل شيء هيك كله كذب يعني هم من يحجون صدق يقولون احنا نعطيكم بيت حلو نعطيكم سيارات نسوي لكم خدمات بس كلهم كذا من يوصلون يمهم يكذبون ويحطون بيت.
What advice would she give to the younger ones that are deciding to go to ISIS?
حياتهم حيل حلوة يعني حياة داعش مليانة هموم مليانة يعني وجع واغتصاب ويعني حرب يعني شلون يندمون لداعش.
Some of the very powerful evidence and testimony last week. And Baroness Nicholson, really, when we're talking today about ways of connecting with young people who might be influenced, I can't think of many stronger or more powerful ways than to listen to that kind of evidence.
You're absolutely right, Hugh, and that's why, as chairman of the AMAR Foundation, I'm working really hard now to try to get the Department of Education and the local councils to allow us to put the videos of these girls. We've got 3 mini videos with their faces covered of their real stories, which are harrowing, into every single school in Britain. I'm not just saying please note the Muslim schools in Britain. This should be in every single school, because we as a society have got to get together. We've got to understand each other. We've got to understand each other's faiths, and that's what's not happened so far.
How did that evidence, how did their presence go down? What kind of response was there?
The response of the young people, and we went on to Salt Lake School in Birmingham, one of these so-called Trojan horse schools. The children there were shattered. I got 16 of them coming down to see me in the House of Lords in September, and 2 of the boys got up, a very sweet gesture, and they apologised very profoundly. Very, very struck indeed. So we want to get those videos out, but we also want to get the AMAR team from the field, because we're running in the south of Iraq a hugely successful, if you can use the word success in this context, a religious tolerance program with Sunnis, Shia, with Christians, with the Yazidis, and with people who don't believe at all. This is a very, very successful program which is funded for us by the European Union. I want to get that program here and teach it in schools and in universities and to grown-ups as well.
Okay, Erin, what are your thoughts on that kind of strategy, given that, again, just to underline, lots of the Prime Minister's remarks today were about trying to get the case across and possibly politicians, as he said, are not the best people to do that. Very often it's to do with people who've had direct experience. Your thoughts on that?
Well, definitely. There's a whole range of credible voices that we need to better tap into, whether that's former extremists or victims of extremism or young activists promoting a different worldview that echoes tolerance and human rights values. There's a range of actors to tap into, and it's about teaching critical consumption skills so that a young person that might be viewing different sorts of propaganda online and offline takes that second to actually have an emotional willpower to question it rather than take it on board. And I think this program does exactly that.
Are there other examples of good programs you've come across which can be as effective? I mean, what's the best practice here?
Well, everyone has a role to play, and I think that's something that was brought up in the Prime Minister's speech, is this is not just a government problem. This is something that civil society needs to be made aware of. Education programs need to have an infrastructure for countering extremism. But it's very delicate because you can't put through programs that seem to attack one minority. We have an issue of violent extremism as an overarching topic. It's not about Islam, it's not about neo-fascism per se, it's about violent extremism. And I think that has the different sides of the spectrum, all the way from what do you do with somebody that has never been exposed to that propaganda, down to what do you do when somebody is showing signs of being interested in that sort of group.
The ISIL people claim to follow a specific school of Islam, and it is indeed a school of Islam, but it's one that the rest of Islam over the centuries has discarded again and again. It's been sidelined completely. They've picked it up and they're running with that, and they're calling it a caliphate, and that's a very magnetic word in this context. So I think we also need to think very hard indeed about how we teach religion in British schools. I think most people nowadays who are children and young people, they don't know anything about Christianity. I think they know still less about Islam. I'm not entirely convinced that the children themselves who are Muslim or who are Christian really know about their faiths, and indeed we have other faiths as well. So I'm very keen on us taking a look at that. And there does seem to be some new proposals coming forward that in future we should teach a choice of two big faiths, and I think that would be a very good thing to do, in which case it should be the same teacher teaching the two faiths.
Interesting thought. One of the issues raised by an earlier guest today, when we talked about particular areas of concern, was prisons, British prisons, and the fact that in his view, and he's one of the leaders of the Muslim community, his view was that this was an area that was almost out of control.
That
there were people
true.
coming out who were hugely radicalised, had gone in his view, you know, not even on the fringes of it. What's your take on that?
In the AMAR Foundation, we've spent about the last 4 years teaching in prisons in Iraq, and that's novel, to say the very least, in the Middle East. But we've also been teaching their families, we've been teaching the prison warders, we've been teaching the local police, the local academies, and we've been teaching 20 ministries, including the whole of the police force. So you want everybody to understand, just as you've said, we don't just want one segment of society, so you have to teach them all. We have a very superior prison teaching programme which ran the Charity Awards of the Year last year.
And do you think that's something that could be used to far better effect in British prisons?
There are definitely areas that are more vulnerable to extremism, whether that be prisons. We've seen certain areas such as universities where these ideas are allowed to foster, where it's easier to create in and out groups. And prisons have actually been flagged as an issue for radicalization for over a decade, not just in the UK, but across Europe, especially in France. And this is something that has been flagged time and time again. So what we really would like to see is actually defining what de-radicalization means and what that looks as a structural program to reintegrate individuals back into society as part of their internment.
It's been interesting to talk to you both, and I'm afraid the clock has beaten us, but thank you both for coming in.
Thank you.
Dr. Erin Saltman and Baroness Nicholson, nice to see you again. Thank you very much.